Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. Now, my favourite book series of all time is the Thomas Cromwell trilogy by Hilary Mantel, the first of which is Wolf Hall, so it is sometimes also known as the Wolf Hall trilogy. And I haven't talked about that book on this channel for a while. I do have several videos on it, so if you want to watch my full review, I will leave that in the cards above. But since I like making recommendations videos, I thought it might be interesting to do very specific, if you've liked that book, then you should read these books video, where I just recommend you books that I think you would like if you enjoyed Wolf Hall or the Wolf Hall trilogy in general. They are all historical fiction, some of them are more recent than others, they're not all set in the UK either, but there's something about the vibe of them that I think is similar to Wolf Hall. So hopefully I'm right, and if you liked Wolf Hall, you'll like these. The first one I'm going to recommend is fairly obvious. If you liked Wolf Hall, maybe you should read other Hilary Mantel books. So the only other one that I've read, but I definitely would recommend, is A Place of Greater Safety. This is even chunkier than any of the Wolf Hall trilogy, I think. The Mirror and the Light maybe, but it is a huge book about the French Revolution. But unlike a lot of books in the English-speaking world that deal with the French Revolution, this doesn't come at it from the perspective of the royal family. It is instead focused on three of the major revolutionaries and the people in their orbit. So we have Danton, we have... Why is Danton the only one I can remember? Robespierre, Danton, Robespierre, and my favourite, Desmoulins, or Camille as is his first name, and yeah, as I said, he is my favourite. So we follow three revolutionaries, Danton, Robespierre and Desmoulins, over the course of the French Revolution and the terror that followed afterwards. And this is a really in-depth book. We really go into their lives from childhood through as they go through their moving into Paris. We see what they like, their growing up, their marriages, and their like intimate relationships. And it is kind of part comedy of manners, part political thriller. So there is very different feelings. So we begin with the growing up, as I said, and there is a lot of like satire, and it's very, very humorous. It's definitely a funnier book than Wolf Hall, but as we get progressively closer, the thing that I think Hilary Mantel is so great at, and that I really loved from the trilogy, is that she's writing famous history, well-known history that a lot of people would know the outcome of. You know what's going to happen to Anne Boleyn, you know what's going to happen to Thomas Cromwell at the end of their books, but yet she still manages to make you feel like maybe it won't happen this time, maybe there's something that could happen. That feeling of dramatic irony, she really works with dramatic irony, and the same is true of the revolution. She makes you feel like everything is very instant and you're in the present moment, and I really enjoy that because it adds tension to a book that could be incredibly predictable. She's also such a great drawer of characters that feel really like nuanced and multi-layered in a very subtle way. She manages to draw characters that feel 100% real and also differentiated from one another despite such a large cast, and she manages to deal with a lot of like meetings and like councils and different arguments, debates and things, and make it interesting, which I think is quite a feat. So I think if you did like Wolf Hall, you will already like Hilary Mantel's writing, and you will instantly feel like you are in a safe pair of hands when you start A Place of Greater Safety. But on top of that, it is a little bit different. I knew much less about the French Revolution than I did about the Tudors going in, and so I think it still managed to grip me, and like I said, I felt for the characters, and I really empathise with what was going on, and at the same time have this humour and just the brilliance with which she paints a scene. It's absolutely wonderful, so I would recommend that. Now, moving away from Hilary Mantel, but keeping with historical fiction from the Tudor period, is A Game of Kings by Dorothy Dunnet. Now, I've only read the first, but this is a really long series set in Renaissance Europe, but this one is, I think it's the first one of the Lyman Chronicles, but that's a longer part of the Niccolo series, and it's in the middle, I think. So it's a place you can start, but it's also a place you could get to in the middle. But definitely I read it as a standalone, and you definitely can do that. But if you're looking for a new series, then I think it might work for you. This tells the story of Crawford of Lyman, who is a disgraced Scottish nobleman in the reign of Henry VIII? Anyways, Mary Queen of Scots is on the throne, and they're trying to marry the baby Queen Mary to Edward, so he might not be king yet. He didn't live very long, so I can't remember. But anyway, mostly what it's about is the sort of machinations and movements between the Scottish nobles, because Scotland was, I mean, still is a different country than England, but it was completely independent at the time. Different monarchy, different system, everything was run separately. It is about the machinations in that court, and Crawford of Lymond was one of the major part of one of the major families, but he was thrown out because everyone thinks he betrayed them to the English, build up to war with England and the potential war with England. And so there's a big cast of characters again, and you've got like Machiavellian machinations, which is very Thomas Cromwell, but Crawford of Lymond is not a Thomas Cromwell-like character at all. He's a very swashbuckling hero, but morally grey in the same way as Cromwell, but kind of charming and suave and sophisticated in a way that I don't think you could accuse Cromwell of being. It's a really engaging book, one with a lot of humour to it as well. You've got to let the story sweep you along a bit, because it kind of gradually unfolds what is going on with Crawford, what's his plans, what's he doing, why has he come back to Scotland, and so it isn't very clear from the outset what's going on. You have to like let it go, but there's so much humour and the characters are so brilliant, and it keeps you going. It's one of those books that I really think would make an excellent TV series. So yeah, I think it's wonderful and I would definitely recommend it. Then we have another big epic book, and that is Cathedral by Ben Hopkins, which I believe came out last year, or maybe it was 2020. But this is a chunky book about the building of a cathedral in medieval Germany and the town, and it's got such a large cast of characters. And we follow like kind of the emerging middle class in the late medieval period in Europe. So we have from the perspective of people of the church, of craftsmen. We start off with a shepherd who's come into town and becomes a craftsman. Who wants to be a stonemason and ends up working as a stonemason, and it's just really about the development of this town, the growth of this town, the machinations of the Catholic Church, the fight for land in Germany, which wasn't a real country, which wasn't a country at the time, so it's various different countries, and the kind of fights between the different dukes. I think that would be the right English word for it, and so it just explores this culture, and there is also a significant chunk of it is told from the perspective of Jewish characters as well. So there's a big part of it that's about what it was like to be a Jewish person in medieval Europe, in Central Europe in the medieval period, and the use of Jewish people as the scapegoat, and how that leads to a kind of them having to leave at one point. It's like I said, a big cast of characters book. Another one where we are dropped in various different points, but the writing is absolutely wonderful. Some of the best writing that I've read in a long time. I really enjoyed it. I felt like it was wonderfully engaging. I felt like it was cleverly done in a similar way to Hilary Mantel, that it felt very immediate and very of the moment. And again, all of the characters felt like it was doing such a good job of exploring the historical minutiae, which I think is one of the things that I love about Hilary Mantel, is that you really feel like you're in the setting, like you're in a Tudor court, and you can see everything physically, and you can imagine the textiles and the food. And I think Cathedral does a similar thing, where you can really feel the kind of visceral details, and I really enjoyed that about it. So if you've been tempted to read Pillars of the Earth but would like one with good writing, then I would recommend Cathedral by Ben Hopkins. Another one that I read last year and absolutely loved is Tyll by Kehlman, which I think won the International Booker. Did it? It was definitely shortlisted. Can't remember if it won. Anyway, I really enjoyed it, and this is set in Europe slightly later. We're in the Stuart period now, so it's set during the period of the 30 Years' War in Germany, and Tyll is a trickster character from medieval German folklore, but he has been moved forward into the 30 Years' War, and we see him as a child before the war, and then kind of we jump about in time in various different perspectives, where Tyll has entered into the court of the Winter King and is playing as a jester, a court jester in various different like he walks a tightrope right at the beginning, and it really is like a very, very dark fairy tale. There are elements of the fairy tale in it, like the tightrope walker and the jester, the king who's locked away in a tower, and his queen as well, and also the kind of this. There's witch hunts throughout it as well, and the woods play a really important part, the dark, dangerous woods as well. So there are lots of like fairy tale or old folklore themes that pervade throughout, but really it is a very like brutal account of the 30 Years' War. There is a people trapped underground at some point, so it can be quite claustrophobic. Really in-depth detail of the violence of war, and kind of a supernatural feeling pervading the whole thing, a feeling that something darker is going on underneath. It is so wonderfully written and translated by Ross Benjamin. I think the writing itself was just so like magical. It gave that atmosphere and that feeling of tension. Like I said, in Thomas Cromwell we have that feeling of tension. I feel that throughout Tyll as well. It is not chronological, it jumps about in time, and I think part of that is to talk about the confusion of war and the confusion of Europe at the time that was like tearing itself apart, when new countries were being formed and old empires were collapsing. And it also tells from the perspective of Elizabeth Stuart, who is married to a prince who became the king of, I can't remember the name of the country because it doesn't exist anymore, but only lasted 6 months. He was the Winter King because he was king for a winter. And they're in exile, and that court gave me very much like Gormenghast vibes. There is a feeling of fantasy, but this is based in the real world, and I think I love that kind of slight magical tinge to things that this has. That's not in Hilary Mantel. That's pushing a slightly different direction, but it's not at all actually magical. It's just like witch hunts and things. And yeah, I thought it was brilliant. It similarly deals with the viscera of historical life, very much more down in the dirt than any of the other books so far, and the muck of things, but just such a compelling, wonderful read. A book that I think you would like if you like the way that Hilary Mantel plays with perspective, and Cromwell, and if you don't mind being confused as to who everyone is or what perspective you're seeing from at the time, because if you like Wolf Hall, you have to be alright with that, and that's The Promise by Damon Galgut, which won the Booker last year. Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies were both Booker winners. The Promise is set in South Africa, and whilst I would say it is historical fiction because most of the parts deal with South Africa's history, and the presence of South Africa's history is very much central to the plot, it does go up to a more modern period. So it starts off with the death of the mother of this family, who makes her husband promise to give their black servant, the house in which she lives. This is a white Afrikaner family in the outskirts of Pretoria. And he says he will, and then the mother dies, and then the promise is broken. And we come back to this family at 4 different points in their life that coincide with 4 points in modern South African history of importance to the country, and how their promise has been broken. And this promise is both this father's promise to the servant who's worked in their house all her life, and also the promise of a post-apartheid South Africa, and the promises that were broken by the government afterwards. And it is a really interestingly written book, another one with a lot of dark humour, and I think that is something we see in Wolf Hall, although I would say this humour is more sardonic. Interestingly written. It goes through multiple perspectives, so sometimes it's written in the third person, as we are an omniscient narrator observing these characters, and as we get closer to a character, it's like we slip inside their mind and it becomes first person, and we see from different perspectives the 3 children of this family, and also some perspectives that are not related to the family come into it as well, to explore different parts of South Africa's history. But also, whilst that slippage happens, when we go from the third to the first and back again, sometimes it is in second person, and it's talking out to you, the reader, you, the audience, you, white South Africa more generally. And it seems like that would be distracting or annoying, but I found it so compelling because it's used so sparingly, and I felt like it really jolted me in a way that felt intentional. I think that he's playing with structure and with our own complicity in what we're reading, and it's just a really clever book with really wonderful writing, and I just absolutely fell in love with it last year. Yet another book that was shortlisted for the Booker is The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste, and I think that if you like the visual imagery of Wolf Hall and the strong use of repeated visual metaphors of ghosts and things, then I think you would like the repeated visual imagery in The Shadow King and the way that this is used to build up a perspective. This is set in Ethiopia in the 1930s, and on the eve of Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia, when Haile Selassie has fled to England. And it is focused in on this band of guerrilla fighters, particularly this woman who has been enslaved and is now fighting following the army as part of their guerrilla fighting against the Italian invaders, and it's about the women who decide to become warriors and this peasant that they dress up as Haile Selassie to invigorate the morale of the troops, and also from the perspective of an Italian photographer who is Jewish, and so his parents have already been dragged off to the Holocaust, but he and the threat of that is being held over him whilst he is complicit in the violence inflicted on the Ethiopians. One of the reasons that I think that it has in common with Wolf Hall is that there is a Greek chorus of women who are telling parts of this story, and it begins with a quote from the Odyssey, and we're very much looking at the history of women and the exclusion of women from the narrative of history and the making of history and who tells history. And I think that that is part of Wolf Hall as well. Thomas Cromwell is working class, from the beginning, and his class is always part of his story, and I think that we're talking about gender in a similar way here. There is also this repetitive imagery of light that coincides with the photographer and the cameras, but also the use of light by the guerrillas to signal to one another in a way that the Italian army can't intercept. And so there are the repeated images of what is light is shone upon and things like that. And I think the strength of the visual metaphor in this book is so, well, it's just so strong and wonderful, and I think that for fans of Wolf Hall, you would enjoy it. Another historical fiction set in the Stuart period, we have The Manningtree Witches by A.K. Blakemore. This is a short little novel set during the English Civil War, which is about a small village in Essex where the witch hunter general starts his crusade against women and killing people, and he decides that multiple women in this village are witches, and this is told from the perspective of a young woman and her mother who live alone and in poverty after having lost the father of the house. And it's a lot about women being on their own and the isolation that happened when a lot of these men were taken off to war, and the accusations of witchcraft, how they are related to the fact that a lot of men have gone missing. It's a very slow moving book where you feel like there is a lot of tension. It's really steeped in Stuart England. It really feels very, like I said about some of the others, very like lived in and real, and down into the working classes of this time period. It's an interesting exploration of the ways that women got by and made money and worked at this time period that I think is not often explored in fiction. But the writing of this is what I think most links it to Wolf Hall, or the thing that I enjoyed most about it, that I think I also enjoyed about Wolf Hall. It's sort of spiky and uncomfortable. It's not an easy read, and that's not because of the plot, but just that the writing is so uncomfortable, and I think that that's a part of the point, because these women are uncomfortable, poverty is uncomfortable, and this accusation of witchcraft is, there is just, you can never sort of relax into anything, and I really enjoyed that about it. The writing is beautiful and very deliberate, but in a kind of uncomfortable way. It is also, I think, does a really good job of using language of the time period without making it feel inaccessible or difficult to read or like a costume. It feels like it's well integrated into the characters, well earned, but it at the same time is not underutilised. None of the characters feel like they are talking with modern sensibilities or modern ideas, which I think a lot of the time when I read historical fiction about women, it is trying to talk about women in a like modern feminist perspective with very modern ideas. And it's not that women of the past had no thoughts for themselves but the culture in which you live has a huge effect on your thoughts and opinions, and I think that is often in less good historical fiction that is ignored. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. The menace, corruption and muck. In fact, someone on the back says it's like Fleabag meets Hilary Mantel. So I've never watched Fleabag, but there you go. Another piece of historical fiction set in the Tudor period. So if you like Wolf Hall for the time period setting, then I would also recommend Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I would say that this isn't quite so, it's not so much the use of language or structure that I have characterised a lot of these books in their relation to Hilary Mantel. This one is more to do with the way that it takes a well-known person, in this case Shakespeare, although he is never mentioned by name and it is from the perspective of his wife, and it takes well-known historical fact about Shakespeare's, he had 3 children, twins and another son, and one of his twins, Hamnet, dies at the age of 11, and that led to the writing of Hamlet, and that's kind of the beginning of the story of this book. The like kernel, the what's the word I want, because she uses this narrative, she uses this metaphor all the time and I've forgotten what it is. The nutshell, the kernel around which it is grown, and then writes out to flesh out the position of women, what business was like, what it was like to be a woman who was running a business in the Tudor period. Again, fleshing out characters and classes that aren't often considered when we consider historical time periods. And I think that it is well done. There is also a part in the centre of the book that is to do with plague, and it talks about plague times and the spread of the plague. So there is, COVID analogies in there, but written before COVID. But regardless of that, I think, like I said, that we see Hamnet's illness and his getting ill and his passing, and we also see, well, she's called Agnes in this book, but she is known as Anne Hathaway. Her life before she met Will and after she married him, and then after the passing away as well. And so it explores all of that, because Anne Hathaway is someone who we know very little about, apart from that Shakespeare left her his second best bed after he passed. Grief, again, is another theme of Wolf Hall as well, the loss of children and the misapprehension that some of us have that loss of children would be less painful in the past because it was more common. But the truth of the grief and the real emotional connection of the grief in both Wolf Hall and Hamnet, I think, are really well explored. And I think, like I said, the kind of feeling of the dread of knowing what's going to happen because of it being historical, the dramatic irony, and the wishing that maybe this time it will be different, that kind of ineffectual, hopeless longing for something to be different. I think that those feelings are evoked by both Hamnet and The Mirror and the Light. Those are 8 books that I think you will enjoy if you enjoyed Wolf Hall or any of the Wolf Hall trilogy by Hilary Mantel. Let me know in the comments down below if you happen to have read any of these books and Wolf Hall. Did you enjoy them both? Do you think that they have anything in common? And I'm always looking for more recommendations, like some of my favourite books. So if you have any recommendations that you don't think that I have read that are similar to Wolf Hall, please do leave them in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you have to say. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and I will put some videos here, one where I'm reading The Mirror and the Light, and that video also my review as well, if you want to go and check those out now. And please do remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I tend to put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!